Jennifer Holmes is a wife, mom, speaker, and writer who also happens to have bipolar 2. And she's exploring how mental health and faith intersect. She's a mompreneur just like you, using her experience teaching the Bible as well as her training and counseling to help women reconcile mental health issues with faith so you can write a new song for your life. So, welcome, Jennifer. And do you work with men too, or just women?
I have both men and
Okay,
women. Yep,
excellent. Didn't wanna exclude anybody, but mostly women are listening.
mostly,
So,
yeah.
um, the introduction gave us a really, high level view, but why don't you tell us a little bit more, about yourself, where you're from, maybe a little bit about your family, things like that?
Yeah, so I am from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, so, Canadian, and you might hear that in my accent. Some people say I have an accent, and, I have 3 children. My son is in his 2nd year of college, and, my daughter is in her last year of high school, and then I have one just going into high school. So,
Mm.
in the latter part of the heavy mom years, although I hear you never stop worrying about them or stop being a mom later. So, sure, I have many more years ahead of me, but getting through the heavy part of it, and um, just became a volleyball mom for the first time. So we've got volleyball taking over our
Fun.
life. I've been married for 20 years to my husband Michael, and he's had several jobs in and out of ministry. We lived in the Philippines for a while.
Mm.
We've had an exciting, adventurous life together. So
That's
yeah.
great. And are you in, Calgary now, or you live somewhere else?
I'm in Calgary. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'll have to brush up a little on my geography. Is that western part of Canada?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's talk about what you know, which is really this mental health and faith and the intersection of the two. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story, and your mental health diagnosis, and how that came about?
Yeah. So if I look back, I can see everything starting around 14.
Mm.
So probably going into puberty about that age. And I can see some ups and downs. But I really thought I just struggled with depression through most of my adult years. And I kept as moms, I kept writing it off to, well, I just had a baby. Well, I was just nursing. Well, I'm just trying to get pregnant. I had 3 miscarriages.
Mm.
So I would write things off to hormones from that. And I just kept thinking, well, it's just this, it's just this, it's just this. And probably about 2 years or 3 years after I had my youngest, I thought, okay, I can't write it off to having just had a baby anymore. And actually, my chiropractor was the one who sat me down and was like, Jen, you're really struggling. You need to go talk to somebody.
Mm.
And so at that time, I didn't seek counseling. I just kind of started delving into the scriptures on my own, just really thinking that I could solve all my problems just by having stronger faith. And I struggled by myself for a lot of years. And then when I hit uh, about 35 or so, I started having major sleep issues.
Mm.
And I would sometimes go months with sleeping like just 4 or 5 hours a night. And it was really starting to affect my physical health. I was getting migraines and weakness and all of these things. And I went to my doctor and I was convinced that, again, it must be hormones of some sort. And I went in and I said, I think I'm hitting some sort of really early menopause. And he's like, "Well, describe me to me all your symptoms." So I'm describing it all, and I said, if I had to say it in one sentence, it's like I have bipolar
Mm.
because I'll be so high one day and Jen was the person who like got things done and stayed up late and had so much energy and could do all the things until I crashed and had what I thought were just bouts of depression.
Mm.
And through that process, he ended up diagnosing me with bipolar 2 disorder.
Interesting. So, I've heard of just bipolar, but I've never heard of bipolar 2. Does it have a range, a spectrum, or is it kinda like diabetes and, we have, adult onset, and we have diabetes 1 where you get it in a child, what makes it bipolar 2?
Yeah. So the simplest definition or way to explain it is bipolar 1 has very high highs. It has lows, but very high highs with psychotic breaks often.
Okay,
And then bipolar 2 has high highs, but not as high. Doesn't usually come with psychotic breaks, but the lows are lower. We struggle more with depression.
interesting.
So it's just those couple of components. So when I have sleep issues, I sleep, maybe 3-4 hours a night. People with bipolar 1 might, when they have mania, they might not sleep for like a week at a time or something like
Got
that.
it. Okay, so it's still the swings, but they're just not quite as wide, and you tend more to the depressed side and not as high on the manic side. Is that
That's right. Yeah.
okay? Got it. That's interesting. I'd never heard I'd never heard a distinction. So that's
Yeah.
really interesting to me. So you're already, in this crisis, I'll call it. You've got this diagnosis, you've got an answer, but now you've actually got a label. And, it's not much like what anybody else would be dealing with this life event of some sort, like you described so many that you already had worked through. But when it's a mental issue, sometimes it can really come with, stigma or surprising responses from people. So, what was the response from, the people around you, your family, your church, the medical people that you engaged with?
Yeah, so the first person I went right from my doctor to my husband, and he was very helpful because I was like, "Who am I now?" That was kind of my thought. Like, am I a different person now that I have this label? And he was just like, "You are who you were yesterday. Like,
Mm,
this doesn't really change anything except for the fact that you now have more information,
mm,
and you can now deal with things differently." The second person I went to was, a counselor,
mm,
and I finally realized that I needed help. I needed to talk to somebody. Bipolar is a major mental health diagnosis, and so it comes with a very high suicide rate. And so it's really important to see a counselor and to start getting some help. And my husband and I had gone through marriage counseling at one point, and so I booked in with my counselor online, and I showed up, and the first question he asked me is like, "Everything okay?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Well, you're here by yourself." And I was like, "Oh, I'm still married. That's okay." I was like, "I'm here because I got diagnosed yesterday with bipolar." And then it was like 20 minutes into the conversation, suddenly I looked at him. I'm like, "Do you do bipolar? Do you help people with bipolar?" And he's like, "Yes, I do." I'm like, "Okay, good. I'm in the right place." So he's still my counselor years later now, and I still see him regularly. But the church was a bit of a different story.
mm,
And I had already built an email list by this point, and I serve in a fairly conservative Christian context. And I sent out an email several months later saying that I had been diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, and half my email list left in that one email. And so
mm,
I can't speak for them why they did, but I just know that they were um, not comfortable in some regard, whether they weren't comfortable listening to me anymore, or whether they weren't comfortable with the word bipolar, or they just thought this was going somewhere they didn't need. I don't know, but that was really hard and really a blow to everything I had been building at that point.
yeah, and what had you been building at that were you in sort of this mental health and faith space at that point, or what were you doing that you had gotten this
Yeah.
list?
Yeah, I had been writing about depression for
Okay.
quite a while. I was a bit hesitant at that point in my life to be that girl, that depression girl, and so
Mhm,
I was still in the mompreneurs know that you need to niche down a little bit, right? And
Yes.
I was still in the I should be for everybody kind of
Right.
stage. And so I hadn't fully embraced mental health, but I was writing mostly about mental health at that point.
Okay. And with the faith, so it was from a Christian
Yeah.
perspective. So these people who left your list were most likely that was the church responding.
Yes.
What
Now I
about
have
your
to
own?
say my own church, yeah, my own church was fantastic.
Good.
My pastor was very supportive. I was on staff at the time and they were
Mm,
very supportive. My pastor was the one who had actually sent us to this counselor originally,
mm,
so he was, good with him, and my friends were amazing. So the church in a broader context was a little bit difficult for me to deal with at the time, but
yeah.
my own local assembly, they were they were fantastic.
Good. I'm really glad. That was going to be my next question. I'm so glad to hear that. And it's one of those things that it baffles me across the board why the church in general can so often respond negatively, because for the most part, most denominations would not respond that way if you had cancer or, you
Yeah.
know, a physical ailment. And yet our brain is physical. And that's where so much of this comes from. And I don't
Mhm.
understand why there's such um, I don't even know the right language to use, a refusal to acknowledge or understand. When we were first married, my husband was getting his master's in counseling psychology. He's not a counselor. He doesn't have the empathy for it. So he went a different way. But we were in a church at that time that that didn't support that at all. And so this poor
Mm,
guy, we're at a church that is basically telling him that he's following a path, a career path that is not biblical. And
mm,
it boggled my mind, honestly.
mhm. Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think there's so much unknown
Mm,
about it, and because the term bipolar or schizophrenic or even depression is not in the Bible, then
mhm.
it seems as though those might not be biblical things. But suffering is all throughout the Bible,
Yeah.
and physical suffering is all throughout the Bible.
Mhm.
And not every, diabetes, cancer, all these things are not listed in the Bible either.
Right.
And so I think it's a misunderstanding because it is such an unknown field.
Yes, yes. Because even Jesus went through mental anguish, which is
Mhm.
a lot of these things. And so we know, and he was perfect. So,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
if he went through it, it's definitely not always a sin issue. But
Yes.
yeah. Now I'm curious, your website is built around the idea of a new song. So tell me more about where that comes from and why.
So I built my website back when it was just pictures of my kids for my family. I was just going to blog for the fun of it. But it was already a foreshadowing of everything that I wanted my business to be built around. It comes from Psalm 40. And if it's okay with you, I'll just read a couple
Yeah,
verses there.
please.
I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. And that was really how I described my depression, was like a pit of despair. And I really felt that. And yet it continues. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see it and fear the Lord and put their trust in him.
Mm,
And I wanted that new song. And I felt that God, even in the midst of my suffering, even though I was not out of the woods or out of depression or out of bipolar
mhm,
later on, that He was still building in me a new song, and one that I could sing for others. And
mm.
that's really what I wanted. It says many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. And I wanted my experience and my knowledge of God through that experience to become something that other people saw, and as a result put their trust in him also.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Because yeah, you want your story to count for something, and
Yeah.
when it can help and encourage other people, that's redemption. And that's, I think, when scripture says he works all things together for good, I think that's what it's talking about, not,
Mm.
"Oh, let's let's cause this ailment so that we can do something with it."
Yes,
But let's take this ailment and turn it around so it doesn't win.
that's
So,
right.
that's fabulous. As you've shifted into, helping people, so as you move from a website, for showing pictures to my family to I'm gonna talk about depression and be really general and broad with it. As you've niched it down into now bipolar, both as someone who's experienced it, but always is also learning how to help people through it. What turning it into the business, what was the hardest thing that you kind of faced when it came to integrating? This is not just something I write about out of hobby and curiosity, but this is something I'm building a business out of. How did you integrate that with home and family so that they worked together? What was your biggest challenge when it came to doing that?
I think one of my greatest fears was that, I was going to embarrass my children,
Mm,
and that it would be really hard for them because they when I first announced my bipolar diagnosis, they were teenagers,
mhm,
and I didn't want them to feel the stigma that I was feeling from some people. I didn't want them um, to be, embarrassed of my online presence,
mm,
and that, in a sense, held me back for a little bit because I was worried about talking um, too clearly, too, uh,
bluntly. Yeah.
bluntly, yeah, to being too vulnerable, right?
Mhm, mhm,
And, and then my son, one time, he gave me 2 gifts in the course of 6 months, and one was he went to Israel on a trip, and he brought back a special pen, and he
mm,
said, "This is because 'cause you're a writer, mom." And then another time, for Christmas, he gave me a leather-bound journal and was like, "This is because 'cause you're a writer, and I'm proud of you," you know?
mm,
And it was really a turning point for
mhm,
me to be like, no, I think they appreciate the vulnerability and they appreciate the realness, and teenagers really they really do want people to be real and vulnerable.
yeah,
And so I think that integrating that into the family life was really more of a mental shift for me than
mm,
something that I literally did,
mhm,
because I had to just sort of come to terms with the fact that my kids were going to see things online, and they follow
mm,
me on Instagram, and they like all my posts and stuff. So if I talk about suicidal ideation, they know,
mhm,
oh, mom was struggling with that last week, and
mhm,
um things like that. So it's it's a choice that we
mhm,
had to make as a family, that I talked with my husband, and that my kids live with. But I think that they have come to terms with that, and
mhm.
I have come to terms with that, and it is just part of our family's calling.
Mhm. Has it strengthened relationships in your family because they see a side of you that not a lot of kids see of their parents? Mental health or not, a lot of parents just don't share their
Mhm.
struggles with their kids.
Absolutely, and I think it has made for a stronger relationship in that they're not afraid to talk about hard things. We use a lot of words at our kitchen table that a lot of families don't use, and and we talk freely and openly about pornography and temptation and sin and mental health and suicidal ideation. And I tell them stories of people I know, and not my clients, obviously, but
Right. Yes.
we talk about things we've heard about on socials or things like
Mhm,
that, and it has just created more openness in our family. And when my kids are struggling with their mental health, they're not afraid to um, to come to me. And like you asked if I'm in Calgary now, it's because I've done a move recently,
mhm,
and they've had to do new schools and all of that. And they've struggled with that, as kids do, teenagers do, moving in grade 9 and grade 12. And they just are very open. Just come to me, mom, I'm feeling anxiety today. Mom,
Mhm.
I almost had a panic attack at school, and, and we're strengthened because of that.
Has that sort of rippled out into their friends? Do their friends talk to you about things that they're not necessarily comfortable talking to their parents about?
Yeah, yeah, I have several teenagers that I talk to on a regular basis.
Hmm. That's
Mhm.
great. Isn't that nice knowing that it's hard work, but isn't it nice knowing that you're the safe place that they're gonna
Absolutely.
come to you and not run from you?
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh, that's great. It is hard work though, so well done keeping at that.
thanks.
Oh. Well, what is one thing that you did as you were kind of, moving this into, I'm gonna have clients, I'm gonna do these things. What was, a resource you stumbled on or a practice you implemented, something that, helped you keep everything sort of in balance, so that the priorities of business building and the priorities of home and family, were in check?
Yeah, I think I had to really sit down and make a list
Mm,
for myself of exactly what my priorities were. And I always say for me, priorities are God first, family second, and then I put church as separate from God. I wasn't really raised that way, but I think that my
mm,
personal relationship with God is the most important thing in my life. But not necessarily every church event is more important than my family. And
yes.
so I kind of put them in that order. And then I had to put my mental health. And that was a hard one for me because I'm very achievement oriented and very much want to like I have a podcast and right now
Mhm,
it's on hiatus because when I moved, I could not handle putting out podcast episodes and moving at the same time. And my mental health couldn't handle that. And that, to be honest, sometimes really bothers me. It
mhm.
really bothers me to have inconsistencies in my business because of my mental health. But I know deep down that that has to be the priority. I
Yeah.
cannot sacrifice my mental health for my business. And so I really had to start like listing out where I can see it and think about it on what actually is the priority. And then within the business too, what is the priority? For me right now, my one-on-one clients are my priority
Mhm,
over my podcast, over posting on social media, over my
mhm,
writing. And so I'm not gonna cancel on them so I can
mhm,
make a podcast episode or so that I can like I'm fine with rearranging my schedule, but I'm not
mhm.
going to say like I need to quit this week because of my mental health. I'll quit the podcast instead. I won't
Yes.
get that
So
out. So just really having a very set list of priorities has and then I don't have to make that decision all the time. I can just look at it and
yes.
know where does this fall in and, a couple weeks ago, I was in a really rough place and I was having some suicidal ideation and things
Mhm,
like that. And so I just didn't post on social media for a week. And
mhm.
you know what? The world doesn't fall apart.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, sometimes as moms, I mean, it's good that it doesn't, but sometimes I think we wish it did because we feel like we're so valuable. They can't do it without us. That
That's right.
it's almost harder when they can.
Yep.
Oh, they didn't actually need me.
That's right.
Oh, well, that's good. So you've built your own filter to basically
Yes.
work it through and very quickly, I'm sure now it's much more of a habit, be able to say, yeah, I'm saying no to this, or I'm just gonna take this off my plate because I know it's gonna be a better outcome for everybody.
That's right.
That's excellent.
Yeah. And I want to make sure that my family has the best parts of me.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and then it sounds like within your business, you've prioritized what gets the best parts of you too, so that
Yes.
it's not either or, but it's where do I put the best of me in both and,
Exactly.
without competing or draining who
Hmm.
you are. So,
Yes.
yeah. So for the mompreneur listening who struggles with mental health issues, but is concerned about what people might think, what is one simple step that she could take today to get her started on the path to healing?
I think you need a trusted source.
Mm.
You need, when you have mental health issues, you need one safe person.
Mhm,
And I think you need your spouse in that if you are married. But you also, I think you need another source, whether
mhm,
that is a friend who is willing to speak truth to you. My highest recommendation is a counselor if you
mm,
can, because you need someone who will tell you when your priorities are off, or who will tell you when you're not following your mental health plan, or
mm,
check in on your self-care. For me, one of my biggest things is sleep. I have to go to sleep at the same time every day, otherwise it
mm,
starts getting messed up.
mhm,
And my counselor constantly is asking me, how are you sleeping? Are you going to bed at the right time? Are
mm.
you exercising? Things like that. And you need that trusted, safe person, because um, not everyone is called to talk about their mental health diagnosis online.
Right.
It's a big deal.
Yes.
It's a big deal to build a business around the fact that you are bipolar.
Mhm,
Like that's really difficult, and I don't think that most people are called to that. And so, if you are a mompreneur who is also struggling with her mental health, you need that one safe space, which is not likely online and
mhm,
not likely, your regular group of friends. It's probably one trusted person that can
mhm.
give you accountability, make sure you're taking care of yourself, make sure that you're getting the help you need.
And just to me, real clear, I mean, because you started it with one resource, trusted resource source. I can't remember which word to use, but this is a relationship, not a I'm going to listen to a podcast or read a book. This has got
Yes.
to be a person that
Yes.
there's a two-way communication with.
Yeah, a person
Mm.
who will ask you questions,
Yeah.
and make sure that you are on the right path, because it's so easy for us to, and everybody understands this.
Mhm.
Everyone has gone into a public space and put on a smile on their face and convinced everyone in the room that everything is just fine when
Mhm.
it really isn't.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have mental health issues to know how to do that. And those of us who do have mental health issues, we can get very good at hiding that from people. And when I first talked about bipolar, people said, "Oh, you can't have that. You don't seem like you have that."
Right.
And I was like, "Well, I know how to hide it."
That's right.
And
Yes.
so it's yeah, we can do that with other people. So you need that one person you feel safe to be who you really are, and who
Mhm.
will also challenge you.
Yeah, and probably, I'm guessing, can start to recognize, "You've got a mask on. You're you're doing that thing, so tell me what's really going on." Yeah.
Yeah, my counselor, the last time I went, it was when I was coming out of those difficult couple of weeks. And in the first 5 minutes, he's like, "Okay, so tell me what's really wrong. You're so flat today." And
Mm.
I was like, "I can see myself on Zoom. I
Like
look happy. What are you talking about?"
that's right.
And I was like, "I was smiling the whole time. I don't know
Yeah.
what you're talking about." And he knew right away, because he's built that relationship with me over years now.
Mhm. That's great. And that is great that, that you
Mhm.
have that relationship. So that's the first thing. Well, this is always the weird transition depending on the topic because we go from sometimes really lighthearted to deep and heavy like this. And then I go, so one thing I ask every guest that I love, I'm a gadget girl. I love a good gadget system tool, something that's going to make life easier. So what is your favorite time-saving gadget system or tool?
All right, so I'm super boring. I tried really hard to be interesting for this part, but I am not. But it is just a physical planner,
Ah.
because I put the number one thing that I put in there is all my meal planning.
Mm,
And I can give you like a mental health tip here, because we have something called cognitive load, and women have this the most.
mm.
And it's just the weight of all the decisions and all the thoughts that we have going on in our mind all the time, and all the things that we need to remember. And it makes it very difficult to function the heavier your load is. And so, we're speaking to moms here. You're not carrying just the cognitive load for you, you're carrying the cognitive load for likely several people.
Everyone.
Yes. And so, the more you can write down it helps to clear it from your mind. And
Mhm.
so the more you can get a list of something somewhere, like that list of priorities, if you can get a meal plan out on to your physical planner. And so I write out what is going to be going on in the evenings and then meal plan around that. Like, do I need a fast dinner? Do I need an
Yes.
early dinner? um do I have too many carbs in a row? Do I need to add some vegetables in there,
Yeah.
and so it really just helps to not have to think about that each day. Like this
Mhm.
morning I just open up, okay, this is what we're having for dinner and breakfast and lunch. I meal plan all three meals, and then it just takes out some, it leaves space for business
Yes.
stuff.
And then you can go, "Oh, it's chicken. I got a thought." And you pull it out
Yes.
now instead of, "Shoot, it's 4 o'clock and we're having
Yep.
chicken." That's not thought.
That's right.
Yes, excellent. Well, I love that. And you just made a good case for to-do lists also because now you don't have to try to
Yes,
remember what to do.
absolutely. I
Uh,
got sticky notes everywhere.
yes, yes. Yes, I, occasionally say wherever I can make sure I'm not the bottleneck to whatever it is, the process, the
Mhm.
information, and so some of what I've done with those things has been with online tools, because then anyone in my family can log in and see
Yeah.
what's for dinner or add something to the grocery list, and, yes,
Nice.
it's good to have those things for them written out.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Jennifer, how can people, find you? Where they connect with you, and do you have any, resources for them?
Yeah, so you can find me everywhere if you search Jen's New Song. So my handle on IG, which is where I'm the most active, is Jen's New Song. My website is jensnewsong.com. Right now, I just put up a brand new free resource, and it is called When Someone Else Falls. And so it's
Mhm.
how to respond to when you hear another leader has had an affair, or someone in your church has fallen into a big sin, or how do we respond with grace? Well, looking at our own hearts,
Yeah.
and what do we do even if it's something that should be reported or something like
Mhm.
that. So that's a new free ebook up on the site. And I've got lots of podcast episodes for you to listen to on there. The new season is about to come out. So the podcast is called Head and Heart, but
Mhm.
you can find it on iTunes or anywhere else. But the podcast episodes each are also on the website.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for, sharing with us today and for being vulnerable. I know that alone is going to encourage someone, and that fits with your whole desire of, helping people have a new song with their story. So, thanks.
Thanks for having me. This was super fun.